Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Brown, and I'll tell you what, I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. I want to give you a little background on what's going on with this podcast. One of the things that I started a long time ago is I did radio, and I did a bunch of radio programs, and it was live radio. And then the podcast world came along, and it seems like just about everybody's doing a podcast. I wanted to make sure I stayed involved with the sport of bass fishing and try to show the positive lights of what's going on with bass fishing. I think it's hard with all the controversies involved with our sport. And I'm not just talking about forward facing and all that other stuff, but just the ethics and integrity of the sport. And sometimes it's hard to figure out who's on first and some of those kind of things. So I got back in the game. I'm back in the game. Ricky Botsford asked me if I'd host this, and I decided I wanted to do it. And so we're going to be hosting this thing every week and try to figure out some of the best people in the sport. And I will tell you, without hesitation, not only one of the best anglers I've ever been associated with, but one of the best men I've ever been associated with is Denny Brauer. And, when I first started doing all the podcasts and stuff, Denny was my first guy I ever did one with. And I felt like it was apropos for me to do that today. So that's what I'm doing. And I'd like to welcome Denny Brauer down in the lovely, lovely Amistad area. Denny, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Terry.
Well, it's funny. It's probably been 10 or so years ago, maybe even longer. You and I talk about the state of the sport a lot, and I always kid people that I could talk about a jig for 45 minutes or a haircut. But I think it's important that you and I kind of talked about why we have things where we're at, why things have changed, what can we do to improve them. And you and I were pretty much on the same sheet of music. We thought that, there were some things happening. You were getting out of the sport at little right after that, and had bad knees and all the other stuff associated with it. But reality said there were some things going on that you were concerned about.
Yeah, you look back at the history of the sport, there's always something, it seems like, that's controversial. Uh, but it just got more serious as time went on. And I don't know whether some of it is social media, whether we contribute to that or what it is. But yeah, if you can put it into simple terms, money makes people do strange things. Lack of money makes people do really stupid things. And in 2008, when the economy went bad, a lot of sponsorship deals disappeared from not only anglers, but from the industry itself. And I don't know whether that triggered a lot of this, but it just seemed like from then on, a lot of bad behavior started to surface.
Well, we have life gets in the way somewhat too. You get older, you have body parts that don't work like they used to. You and I both know that with all the replacement parts we've had. But I think more than anything else, we had a certain way we were brought in the sport that included ethics, it included integrity, no hole jumping, all the things that were associated with now a new age of fishermen. And, I'm not sure any of it's really, really, you can put a finger on it or anything else, but I think it's important that we note that old school and new school are together. They're not separate anymore. And you're seeing these 20-year-old kids going out and just whacking them. And I love watching it. I love watching it. I bet you do as well. But I think the things around it and the social media aspects of it that you're talking about here are something that we have to really kind of get our hands around.
Yeah, and what the answers are, I don't claim to know by any means, but it's such a great sport, and you just hate to see some of the changes. You'd like to go back in time just because of the integrity part. You could have a competitor that, I mean, believe me, it was as competitive back then as it is now, if not more so. But that same competitor would tow you in if you broke down, knowing that you were going to beat him. I mean, that's just was part of the game. If you led a tournament, there's no way that competitor was going to come anywhere near you. He was going to give you every opportunity to win that tournament. It was just a more of a gentleman's type of game back then, I guess. And I think that's part of what made it great. It's part of what made the fan base absolutely love the sport. And to a certain extent, I think we've lost a little bit of that.
Well, as somebody that participates, I fish as much as I always did, but I think it's waning a little bit. And I think that, I'm a fan first, honestly. I mean, that's how we met. And I was a fan of yours, and it's kind of funny because your heroes sometimes aren't people older or somebody that's died or whatever. I've been around since Abraham Lincoln was president. So I understand things change. We're not using persimmon shafts in our drivers anymore. We're not doing all that kind of stuff. Things change. And I don't think anybody that I've talked to is against that change. I think they're against some of the things that are going on in the background. And I think that you and I have a common bond in the fact that we came through it back when Ray Scott started it and knew what he was trying to do and the set of rules he had and the Harold Sharps and the Dewey Kendricks and all that kind of stuff. There was something else that happened, and it was during that same period of time when the Federation broke off. And then we had the split with the pros and all that kind of stuff. Did it matter a lot? Probably didn't to everybody that was a fan, but it mattered inside the sport. It mattered to the people. Who the hell do you sponsor? Who do you go see? Who's your hero? Who's not your hero? And I think some of those things entered into it too. But I think, I look at these podcasts that are out there now, and I'm doing one right now. I guess I'm an idiot too, but I don't want to stir the pot. I don't want to stir the pot. What I want to do is I want to talk to my heroes, talk about what they like, what they don't like, and see what we can do to maybe rectify some of the negative and turn it into positive.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's so much negative out there, and people get triggered real easy. It seems like no matter which direction you go on a topic, you're going to be wrong. There's just a lot of haters out there. I try to avoid controversy as much as I can. That may be the chicken way out, but what does it gain you? I try to live a happy life, and I don't want to be mad at the world all the time. So it's kind of nice to actually be retired where some of this doesn't make a difference in my life, but it does make a difference in a lot of anglers' lives. And I'm like you, I love the sport. I want to see it get better, and anything I can do to help it make better, I'm certainly all for. But some of these situations, they're just attitude adjustments, is what needs to happen.
It's funny because you haven't quit fishing. You're not fishing the pro tours, but you're still fishing. You fish probably every day or every other day. And if you get your alternator fixed, you can fish again tomorrow. But here's a situation is that our love of the sport, the going out, being in the outdoors, catching a fish or two, enjoying the company of someone you go with, those are all still vital to what we do. I remember one time I had a leader in the sport tell me, if you didn't have us, you'd have nothing to report on. Well, I argued that. I said, wait a minute, people are still going to fish. And I believe that. And I think it's important to note that if we really drive this thing down, it's really about the fishing part. It's about the outdoors part. It's about all that stuff. The pro game is a very myopic, very small part of it. The thing I like about the pros is they've influenced so much. They influence new baits, new tackle. Look at you. All the stuff that you've innovated over the years, it's a result of being a pro angler.
Yeah, the bottom line is the love of the sport. You look at the anglers that have been real successful fishing professionally over the years, those guys love to fish. What do they do when they're off? They go fishing. Why did I retire early? So I could go fishing where I wanted to go fishing because I love fishing for big bass. That's why I moved to Lake Amistad. Uh, so the love of the sport carries on no matter what you do, whether you fish professionally or whether you're just a beginner getting into it. And that's what people need to remember. Why are we even doing this to start with? We're doing it for the love of the sport. Yeah, technology improves, a lot of things improve. That's part of life. You don't have your flip phone anymore in your pocket, probably. You probably got a good phone.
Yeah.
So, a lot of things keep changing. Some of us don't keep up with it near as well as some other people. And, uh, yeah, the young guys have certainly adapted to the forward facing game faster than some of the older guys just because they're more technology savvy than what we are, or they enjoy fishing that way more, which is for some of us probably the bottom line. If you don't enjoy doing something, why do it? And so there's just a lot of things come into play, but it always goes back to exactly what you said, Terry, the love of the sport.
Well, some guys like to deer hunt too. I'm kind of looking behind you there a little bit. Let's talk a little bit. I remember High Rock Lake where a guy named Denny Brauer got last.
Yeah.
And then I watched the next year him win a classic, and that was a highlight for me. I will tell you that day when you won the classic, I had to help one of our buddies, Tommy Biffle, push a boat off a dadgum beaver pile one time, and it was the story was a funny one because Tommy and I in our underwear is not a pleasant picture, but we had to get out and push a boat off a beaver off a beaver pile. So I had all my clothes laid on the deck of the boat. Tommy decided he needed to goose the engine just a little bit to get us over the rest of the way, and it was coming out of a pocket. he covered my clothes. So when you won the classic, I had a rubber Helly Hansen rain suit on and nothing under it. So I was cheering just as hard as I possibly could. I remember that, and I remember the bait selection. I remember the tube. I remember all that kind of stuff. And that was something I'll always have in my head. I tell that story over and over again. But I want to kind of touch base on what you're doing now. And I think it's important. You live at Amistad. Tell me a little bit about some of the stuff you've got going on that trips your trigger now.
Oh boy, as you can see, I do a lot of hunting in the hunting seasons, and part of the reason I did move to Texas is all the outdoor opportunities you have in this state. And I go to Colorado, I go to Illinois. I've got friends up there I deer hunt with, and so I stay pretty busy. Got a good friend that's got a ranch in East Texas. That's where a lot of these bigger deer come from. So I really enjoy that part. It's a good release. It's something different, but here on the lake, I average probably 5 days a week out on the water. I just enjoy this lake. There's not a lot of boat traffic. It's peaceful. I may see a Mexican netter once in a while, and that may be the only boat I see during the week. So it's very relaxing, and the fact that you got the opportunity for a great big, 12, 13 pound fish to bite is pretty cool. I did not have that up at Lake of the Ozarks, and I enjoyed Lake of the Ozarks, but as you know, you can probably get run over before you ever catch a 10 pounder there. But so that's just kind of my life: fishing and hunting, and doing the things old people do as far as getting body parts repaired.
Well, we as life does things to us. Your wife and my wife both are going through a little bit of medical stuff, and not to beleaguer that, but I signed up for this almost 50 years ago with my wife, and I know you with Shirley. Shirley, how much did Shirley do in the background for you? She was the glue. Same with my wife Sue, and we have an obligation there, but it's also important to note that we're humans. We're people who are going to do the right thing. And I think the right thing could enter into fishing a little bit better too sometimes. Maybe not to win, but maybe to do the right thing. Denny, I've had 20 people, if I've had one, said that Denny Brauer taught me how to win. And not just in a tournament, but in life. And I think that's a big compliment to you.
Well, I appreciate that, but it's not that difficult. There's a right way and a wrong way, and always take the high road, take the right way, and in the long run, that'll make you a winner.
Let's talk a little bit about equipment. I mean, not forward facing. We don't have to get into that, but I know that you've been a Ranger guy since I can ever remember. You still are, and you changed brands on outboards, but it's only because they dissolved one of the brands. And things are changing all the time, and we have to do that as well, don't we?
Yeah, you got to adapt to the equipment. You got to, especially the guys that are totally fishing for a living, you got to stay on top of the technology and use the greatest and latest, and or you're going to be at a disadvantage. And you need to do everything you can to at least be equal when the tournament starts. And you can't be behind on equipment. And you got to be able to run a rig that'll get you from point A to point B and back. And things have changed a bunch. I remember, God, I've never run another boat other than Ranger, as you know, my whole career, other than a 12-foot John boat when I started out. But you look at some of those old Rangers, man, the runs we made, going 100 miles on Kentucky Lake over to Lake Barkley and back. And uh, those are little boats with small motors on them, 150s compared to what we run now. And now I'm running, one Ranger 521R. And of course, I got a 300 on it since I don't fish national events anymore, which a lot of times there's several people go with me fishing, so it carries a load well, and I'd feel comfortable crossing the ocean in that boat. So a lot has changed technology-wise, motor-wise. I was with Evinrude my whole career until they decided to get out of the outboard gasoline engine part of it, and then I went with Mercury, and uh, I guess I've been running a Mercury, 5, 6 years since Evinrude got out, and I've had zero issues. They just been an outstanding motor. So, once in a while the competitors are just as good as the product you're running. You just don't know it because you become a little prejudiced, I guess. But I have certainly nothing bad to say about Mercury. They've been awesome.
It's funny. we've got a couple common friends, one Zell Rowland, one Tommy Biffle, and all three of those knuckleheads. Well, I can include you in the knucklehead business, but and then I would kind of be tagging along once in a while. There are stories that probably couldn't be told on a podcast, but we know about them, and it makes you smile on the inside. Tommy will call me up, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'll, "What do you think I'm doing?" "I'm talking to you, Tommy." Or Zell will call you up. I miss those days more than anything. I miss those days of the camaraderie and going to the Mississippi River and doing all the things we did together. I miss those days. And hopefully somewhere along the line, I went down and I spent some time with you down at Camdenton at your house down there, and we had a blast. I remember you made a flip one time. There's a basketball hoop, and you made a flip into the basketball hoop. And I remember talking about, 99% of the people could have never hit that basketball hoop, but you did it. And I mean, it's the thing on the water, the friendships, the partnerships, the people. You and I sitting here talking right now. It just doesn't happen unless we're friends.
No, that's the toughest part about retiring from something where you don't get to see those people as often. And I still stay in contact with most of them, and that'll never ever end. The problem is, it just seems like time gets more precious, and you don't get together as much. You don't get to go share a boat. You don't get to make those stories that you can't tell about, and those good memories. So that's a tough part of the sport when you pull away from it. But that was the glue that really held the sport together, was the groups of people, the friendships, and that still exists. There's a lot of camaraderie out there now, guys. That stay together, camp together, whatever it may be, and help each other out. So I don't want to make it sound like all those good times are gone, because there's not. There's a lot of good people out there still competing and fishing.
Well, it's kind of like I've got in my office here, it's sort of a memorabilia place. It's like you got deer heads. I got a Denny Brauer shirt, a Randy Hall shirt, a Gary Klein shirt. I got a Woo Dave shirt, an Edward Evers shirt, and I've got a lot of things that were precious to me. What's funny is I don't collect things to buy them. When somebody walks up to me and hands me a spinnerbait like Kevin Van Dam and signs a blade on it, he said, "Hey, here you go." And that means something to me. And I think that's the thing that we got to get back to in our sport, is that the history of the sport is significant. It's not like anything else. It's not like baseball. It's not like football. It's not like anything else. The anglers are approachable, just like I've got you on here. If you were at a show, you'd talk to anybody that walked up to you. That's not necessarily the case in other sports, and I think it's really important for us to note that and look at some of these young anglers and say, get out there and help some kids. When we started high school fishing, I don't know if you remember this, but I did a deal at my little local lake up here called Evergreen Lake. I called it the Wired to Fish World Championship. You were there, and first year I go out there, and you were fishing with a buddy of ours, and I ended up winning that deal. And it was a bunch of sticks, and I shouldn't have won it, but I did. You were eating a chocolate chip cookie and came up and told me to get off that spot so you could catch them there. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I said, "Go ahead, have at it." And the funny part of that was you had a jig you were working on. It was a prototype jig, and you weren't happy with it. And you lost a couple of fish. And that minute on the water, you made a phone call to rectify a hook in that jig. You remember that story?
Yep, I sure do. I remember
Yeah.
the spot.
Yep, and the funny part about it is the abuse that I received because I beat all you guys that one time. The next year when we had it again, we had the second time. I was not going to get anywhere I wanted to get to because people were going to run me into the trees. Anything they could do to keep me from winning because I rubbed it in pretty strong. But that's what this is about. I love this. I love this sport, and I'm honored that you would spend time with me, and I'm honored that you're a friend, and I consider you a deep friend, and you and your wife Shirley have meant a lot to me for a long, long time. That will never change. That will never change.
Well, you've done so much for us. All the exposure you gave me during my career, you don't know how much that only helps me, but the sponsors. And, without exposure like that, sponsors can disappear. So you understand the game, and all that stuff is tremendously helpful. And it's a job, and you made our job a lot easier. And we certainly do appreciate that.
Well, we're gonna keep plugging at it. I hope someday I'll get down to Amistad. You've invited me about 1,000 times. I've not made it, but here in the next couple of years, I think that's going to happen. And if you'll put up with me for a day or two, maybe I'll come down there and we'll catch one of those 12 pounders. What do you think?
Well, you need to do that. That's what I tell everybody. You can't do it unless you try. And you got to fish where big fish live, and they certainly do live here.
Well, Denny, I appreciate you being with us here. You know, we're all bass, no bull here, and you've took it to the next level with the no bull. I love you to death, my friend. Have a great day.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it.